So this is the second part of our workshop, talking a little bit about improvisation. And as I told the folks earlier, the word improvisation sometimes can be scary to folks, but the purpose of this class is to make it so that it's not scary. So we got through the front side of the handout. If you'll flip that over, we'll look at a few more ideas. We already talked about canon and ostinato and pedal point and combining those in various ways, ornamenting melodies, and we demonstrated a drone with a bagpipe sound on Amazing Grace. There's another kind of drone, another kind of harmonic pedal is what I call it, that you could do with the tune Piccardy, Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence. It's the number 80 in your hymnal. How many people's congregations sing this tune? Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence. So whether you're playing this as an introduction to a hymn or just a communion meditation or something like that, I absolutely love this tune. So one of the things you could do, taking the opening motive, the opening notes of that, you could take that and just create this wonderful, lush, harmonic pedal. You could play any kind of dissonant chord on a celeste and it can sound fabulously wonderful. So this doesn't sound disturbing. It actually is like this wonderful incense-filled room, you know. So then moving progressively to slightly more difficult ones, we can talk about toccata. You can always, let's go back to, for example, number 130, Hosanna Loud Hosanna. So with this, let's say, well, we can be in A flat here for this. You can do nearly anything for a toccata figuration and make it sound pretty spectacular, even without it being very difficult. So if we're in A flat, you know, we talked a little bit about the pentatonic scale. You have 1, 3, 5. You can have 1, 2, 3, 5. So A flat, B flat, C, and then you could just use both hands. One that is kind of fun, if we turn to number 231, you can use alternating chords to do something like this. That alternating chord toccata figuration in manuals, and then playing the melody in the pedal with a nice big full pedal sound. So then when I have all the sound mixed in, you can make a toccata out of nearly anything. Looking now to when we're actually accompanying or leading the congregation as they're singing. Turn to number 74. We talked about this a little bit before in How the Ages Past. One of my favorite verses in this hymn is the fifth verse. Time like an ever-rolling stream bears all its sons away, or all its own away. They fly forgotten as a dream dies at the opening day. There's something about that I like, this constancy of the pedal. It can just stay underneath. of time that's all just a never-ending stream underneath it all. One other idea that you can use to just alternate, to make what your accompaniment is a little bit different, is to invert the soprano and alto. How many of you have ever done that just as a way to make that a little more interesting? If we stay on that same hymn, that would be taking this. So instead of, I just take the alto up an octave. So here's how that would sound with everything else with it. Ready-made descant that won't mess with what anyone else is singing in the congregation. You can do that with nearly any hymn, especially ones that have parallel sixths are really good. Does anyone know the hymn tune Beecher? If that's something, yes. Lord, that one is really nice because you have these parallel sixths that are created when you invert that. Another really fun one is punctuating chords. So let's see. Does anyone have a favorite kind of rhythmic, bold hymn?
Immortal Invisible.
Immortal Invisible. What number is that?
It's early.
It's early.
6.
Number 6. United Methodist Hymnal doesn't go that low. We started at 60-something, I think.
Oh, wow.
So, with this hymn, you could... So, the idea is that we don't play all of the time. You might keep the melody going and play a chord on a downbeat. And then you can start to vary it a little bit to make it interesting for the congregation. So I could play let's try this one once with you singing. Since it's mid-afternoon, we need to wake up a little bit. Let's try this one. 1, 2, 3, 4. I go to just unison melody, and I might play the chords on 3-1, 3-1, so that it gives that feeling of arsis and thesis leading into the downbeats. You also can have a little bit of fun kind of creating a hymiola. Let's try just the third line. Most glorious. Let's try that. 1, 2. Most play on every other beat. And as long as you give your choir warning that you might do that and tell them just keep singing, then, you can have good fun with that. It doesn't require you to change any of the harmonies, although I could resist and did that a little bit there. But it will vary the texture. telling your choir to keep singing reminds me, we have this every year at our church, Highland Park United Methodist. We have a end-of-year music appreciation banquet for all of the adults involved in the music ministry. We have a banquet on a Sunday evening, and it usually has a fun theme. This past year was Sound of Music, so everyone came dressed as their favorite character from the Sound of Music. And we do kind of a video PowerPoint review of the year in review, and it's always put on by a person who loves to kind of poke fun at everyone else in the choir. And but it makes for a really fun occasion. We did music. We actually did music staff Jeopardy one year, where all of the music staff were the contestants on a quiz show like Jeopardy, and we could choose our different categories. And one of them was famous quotable quotes by former directors of music, and there were all sorts of ones. We had an occasion where in the middle of at the beginning of a wedding at which the choir was singing, it was St. Patrick's Day, or it was the Saturday, and someone had had a bit too much to drink several blocks from the church and had wandered into the church and walked down the center aisle. This was during the prelude music, and the choir is all sitting there watching this happen, and the person comes up and kind of slumps over the altar table like this, and everyone in the choir is sitting there thinking, what should happen? And my predecessor, the director of music, David Davidson, leaned over the organ and said, "Keep playing, the police are on their way." And of course, I couldn't see what was going on, so I had no idea what that meant, but it made for a really good quote. So the keep telling your choir to keep singing reminded me of Philip Baker, who was a previous director of music there, said, "I don't care if the person processing in front of you falls down and dies, step over them and keep processing." So if you give your choir a heads up on whatever you might try with this, they will lead strongly, and then the congregation won't hesitate. So having those punctuated chords can be effective. You can do an acapella verse. How many of your congregations ever sing acapella? That's fabulous. A little bit. And that's good. And especially here, you want to let your choir know that that's what you're going to be doing. But a great way to do that is that you start out a verse, and we always sing the internal verses in parts, the outer verses unison melody. So on an internal verse, when the choir is already going to be singing, it makes for a great opportunity to kind of drift away. So what I might do on a hymn like Amazing Grace, we might be singing, and we might start, say, let's see, Amazing Grace is number 330. So say we're doing that, and we get to 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear. You can run and hide by starting the verse, closing the swell box, and then leaving out soprano, leaving out alto, leaving out tenor, and then suddenly it's on the bass, and suddenly, before they know it, they're singing a cappella. So I call it run and hide. You close the boxes and then you kind of gradually get out of the way, and suddenly they're singing a cappella. And the good thing about that is if it starts to fall apart, you can jump right back in. But it's really wonderful to get to the point, especially with well-known hymns. I wouldn't try with anything that they're not secure with, but to give the congregation that experience of singing something a cappella. Again, with the choir's help. We talked a little bit about how you can alternate melody and chords to give that variety in an introduction. You can do the same thing in a hymn like. And then you could change it up and go. So, having melody notes, sometimes by themselves, can work really great on a final verse, where then you punctuate by adding in the rest of those, and you can vary harmonies very easily like that. How you might venture a little bit with giving that really rhythmic, punctuated undercurrent underneath their singing. One of the things I like to do on certain verses of certain hymns, let's stay on Amazing Grace, number 330. When I get to the third verse of this, through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. This verse never seems quite right when it's sung in major. I always feel like it really is much better in minor. But how do you do that easily when you're in the middle of a hymn? So what I use is the relative minor. So who can tell me what the relative minor of G major is?
E minor.
E minor, that's right. So you take G and you go down 2 steps in the scale. So, where we might have just finished with, whoops. My first, and then I might play a unison melody at the beginning of this. So that we would have this sending the signal, singing melody. Don't try to sing parts in that, or you really will find dangers, pulls, and snares. But as soon as I land on E minor, you can really do anything to paint this picture of that dissonance. So I just in my left hand start creeping with E, F sharp, G, A. That same set of 5 notes that we played Picardy with when we did. So. And if you want to come out of that, then the pedal can drift down by half steps from E to D to E flat to D. And I would probably take off my reed and put on the mixture then for "'Tis Grace Has Brought Me." Through the dangers, toils, and snares, and then grace will lead me home. Another one was Engelberg that we sang this morning, when in our music God is glorified. What number is that here?
435.
435, thank you. This is like a story. So, the fourth verse of that, and did not Jesus sing a psalm that night? What night was that? Which night are we talking about?
Gethsemane.
Gethsemane, that's right. So he knew he was going to be crucified. And what did he do? He was singing. He sang a song. So for some reason to me, that doesn't quite feel right in G major. It has much more poignance if it's So what you can do right from the beginning of that is instead of on the downbeat playing G major, you could play E minor. And it'd be really effective if you have the left hand on a secondary mandolin, a swell, maybe with a reed, with the box closed, if you have 16-foot manual stop, if you have a 32-foot soft flute, it'll just add to that kind of mystery, that growly, dark, ominous sound, and then playing the melody on your main mandolin. I'm just alternating back and forth between these two chords. Transition back when we get halfway through it to then let us sing for him who won the fight. So just again, an idea that will come to you out of looking at the text really closely and finding, how could I express that? Sometimes you can't express the text really well in the key in which it's written, and using the relative minor is a great way to do that. Let's see, where are we? You can look at, we gave Amazing Grace, look at number 44. For the Beauty of Evil. I love this verse in which we have, do we not have mystic harmony in this?
Yeah, the fifth thing.
There it is. I think it comes earlier in the end of the symbol. So I love this part. It's too irresistible to let mystic harmony fly by. So you can signal at the beginning of the fifth verse, we're going to do something a little different here by So there's not a deep, lost chord kind of science to this. Sometimes it's just experimenting. Probably not experimenting right on the spur of the moment in the service, but in your preparation before. So. So that way it stands out to everyone. I thought that there was a moment in, tell me again, what was when in our music?
4:35.
4:35. Where is it here? Ah, yes. How often making music we have found what? A new dimension in the world of sound. So let's sing that. 435, verse 2. Everyone have that? Ready and. I just let it move by whole steps instead of diatonically. So F natural instead of F sharp. And I left out that C sharp, so that's just a C natural on the word up. So listen to it one more time without you singing.
Hopefully. The humidity level in my office at home was 79%.
Good for growing roses, but not for doing office work.
Yeah, it was pretty bad, so I'm so sorry.
That's all right. It's good to see you. So we have mystic harmony. We have new dimensions in the world of sound. And as I said, remember to signal the congregation and tell your choir before you do anything like this. Let them know on which verses they need to sing unison melody. When you do an interlude between verses, turn to number 231. It's nice if there's a way to bring back the tune somewhere in the interlude, maybe right at the end of it. So say we're singing this. Why don't we go ahead and sing verse 2, and then we'll go, then I'll play a little interlude at the end of that, and we'll go into 3. So let's just sing this right in verse 2. Come lift your hearts on high. 2, 3, 4. we don't really have enough time to talk about a lot of modulations here, but when you do an interlude, whether you change keys, whether you stay in the same key, if you bring some part of the tune back, even if it's just a couple notes, a motive that folks will recognize, that can wrap it all together. And then the thing that I would always say to remember is if you do plan to modulate, keep in mind, always aim for the target of the key that you're, the dominant of the key you're headed towards. I got into a lot of trouble one time on the hymn Immortal Invisible, because, you know, that's in what key in most hymns? It's in, well, it's in A flat, I guess, in this one. I'm used to it in G, but so it begins, it outlines a C major triad. So I get to the end of the penultimate verse and I start improvising a modulation. I had not planned to do one, and so this was really improvising. And for some reason, that opening C major triad got stuck in my head, and so then I'm aiming for the dominant of that, which is actually the key that I'm holding in. I started going through the circle of fifths. I think I went through all 13 keys as I tried to wind my way back around to eventually get to E flat, so that I could end in A flat. So the point being, it's good to always remember where you're trying to go, because what was it Yogi Berra said? If you come to a fork in the road, take it. You may not know where you end up. So, let's see, how are we on time? We're 4:40. So we've talked a lot about improvisation in terms of hymn introductions as a way to get people engaged to sing. And then we've talked a little bit about how you might improvise or vary what you do in the context of them singing. There are, of course, a lot of other opportunities. Oftentimes, it can be so much more interesting if the choir is singing an acapella anthem rather than just playing, you know, their pitch, like, and then they sing, which is certainly fine, but it can be really nice if you have some little short improvisation. How many of you know Mac Wilberg's anthem, Love Divine, My Love's Excelling? Really, almost all of Mac Wilberg's anthems start off with a unison melody, usually the men. And then the women come in on page 2. That's part of his wonderful formula. In Love Divine, My Love's Excelling, it actually begins a cappella. And like many of his pieces, it begins softly, it builds to this wonderful dramatic conclusion. I think it can be really nice, instead of just playing the pitch, you know, to have some sort of an introduction that kind of gives a little bit of a sense of the piece, but doesn't give it all away. So I took something very simple there, a descending line, just going down. It begins in E minor. So that's, and that doesn't add a lot of time to the service, but it just makes it so much nicer than going and then starting again. Of course, if you want to be bold, and I would encourage you to do that, Plan a time that you're going to work out an improvisation ahead of time and then play that as a voluntary. Pick your favorite hymn and pick one or two of these ideas that we've gone through and make a little prelude up. I'm curious, how many of you ever do that? Yeah, a little bit. So you can do it. You can do it. We have these skills that we've gone through today. It doesn't have to be super virtuosic or anything like that. You can use a little pedal point here, a little ostinato there, a little canon maybe in a simple section of something, and suddenly you've got a composition. So I'd encourage you to do that. And then, of course, I remember in one of my graduate service playing classes when we were talking about what is the organ used for in worship. Dr. Jones said to lead congregational singing, to accompany the choir, and also to provide voluntaries. And those were the three that I had always heard. That's pretty much all that the organ does. And she then said that there's one more. Can anyone say what it is? And she said it's to grease the wheels of worship. And so there are inevitably going to be those times that you need a little bridge here, or you need a little extra music, or we're still waiting for the bride, or Aunt Josephine hasn't shown up yet for Uncle Joe's funeral, or whatever it is. So the family's not ready. So there are going to be those times, and you can be assured that if you pull out Jesu Joy Man's Desiring, which is going to take you about a minute and a half to get all the way through, that as soon as you start playing that, the family shows up and you have to cut and it feels awkward. But if you decide, I'm just going to improvise a bit on Jesus Loves Me, and you can make something really quite simple but quite beautiful that can be 20 seconds long or 20 minutes long. You're going to have to go through pretty much every technique that we've talked about today. I'd love to hear a toccata on Jesus Loves Me. I think that'd be really exciting. And then, of course, meditations after prayers. I think another really wonderful thing that you might, if you feel like this could work, is if there's a particularly evocative scripture reading. A lot of the Psalms, a lot of scriptures that have emotional intent, not so much the Levitical laws or the historical accounts of so-and-so begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so, but Psalms, ones where there are imagery, my God, why have you forsaken me? The 23rd Psalm. It can be really effective to have a little improvised underlay underneath someone reading that. So you might sometime take a look at your favorite psalm, one that's particularly evocative, and just decide you'd like to improvise on that. Whether or not you're going to have someone reading that or not, you could just put in the bulletin, today I'm going to play, it'll be Psalm 23 by Joe Smith, or Josephine Smith, and then you have made up your own musical telling of that. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. You can have a very still sound with kind of murmuring flutes, laying down beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you could go to a kind of minor mode. You could have kind of reedy sounds, and then everything could turn brighter. So think about using improvisation not only with tunes that we know as a way to kind of spice and enliven them up, new wine into new wineskins, but to just as maybe an exercise in your own personal devotion. How might I link something I believe spiritually and put that into musical words, just a musical expression, and then play it in a worship service. I wanted to leave a little time for questions. So does anyone have any questions or comments, things that you've done before that you feel like have worked well? Techniques that we haven't talked about today? It's the mid-afternoon lying beside still water.
Well, you were doing the short introduction earlier, and all I could think about was I was doing a short introduction for the closing hymn, but my minister of music didn't have his hymnal, nor was he anywhere to be found. And I was ready to stop the introduction, and then I realized he wasn't there, so I had to keep going. Or he wanted a short one, and I was ready to stop, and he goes, keep playing.
Keep playing. Yeah.
And you're at the end, so you find
Yeah.
ways to make it sound like you meant to do it.
Exactly.
So I want to know, do you play and conduct, or do you?
Most of the time not. We actually, it's funny, how many of you know My Eternal King by J.D. Marshall? This is actually the 60th anniversary of the publication of that. And I have loved that anthem for a long time. The most wonderful thing is that now I serve at the church where she wrote that as a 20-something-year-old girl singing in the choir. It's one of the first anthems she ever wrote, and it's one of the most amazing that there is. So we did that 2 weeks ago. There was an article that came out in the United Methodist Worship publication right at the same time as we were getting back from our Chancellor Choir's tour to Europe. And I had already planned that we were going to do My Eternal King on that Sunday because the choir can basically sing that with their eyes shut. And our choir conductor was actually still in Sweden, so I said, well, we'll do My Eternal King, and I'll play it, and I can, give cues and nods where I need to. And so I do that occasionally, and that's one of those pieces that there's a very specific way that I like to play it, and so it's like, well, if I can do this, and the choir basically knows it by memory, then they can, cut off my head nod here and there. So so we do that. But most of the time, I'm playing, and with memorial services, the family is coming in, and sometimes they reserve, 5 rows for the family, so I know, okay, I'm going to be playing about 2 minutes. And sometimes then I only need 45 seconds, and so I'll usually plan to be playing a hymn like "Oh God, Our Company Just Passed," where I can easily vamp as long as I need to. Yeah.
So do you have just the music? Okay, you have a choir conductor. Does he also lead the hymns, or do you just do that from the organ?
I just do that from the organ.
Okay.
Yeah. And we've gone back and forth about sometimes would it be good to have a song leader, stand in the pulpit, either conducting or not. I always feel as the organist, I like to set the tempo, and then if you articulate well and you have a good sense of rhythm and you think about the big beat and those things, you can give the congregation pretty much everything that a conductor or a song leader would. And sometimes you might actually be able to do it with, more musicality than the typical song leader, who just gets up and beats, and everything beats the same, You can give nuance when you get to, and did Jesus sing a song on that night, or through many dangerous toils and snares. There are lots of different things you can do with registration and with some of the techniques we've talked about today. So my gut is usually not to have one. But sometimes if I do a run and hide and suddenly everyone's singing a cappella, I may conduct a little bit so that they can see, or if there's a fermata like on that, let's see, what was it we did a couple of weeks ago? We did an old gospel hymn. It's one of those that ends with a fermata, but we were on an acapella verse, and I really didn't want to come back in after the fermata, and so I just directed and conducted that. but then I go right back to playing the organist. I don't normally, conduct.
I was just curious if you were able, because you are very creative in what you do, and did you have to run that by somebody else, or are you able to just, you do your thing?
Really, what I usually do is just give the choir the heads up at the rehearsal.
So you're not
ahead
having
of
to
time.
discuss it with somebody else?
That's right. That's right. Now, how many of you play with a pianist? Like if you're the organist, how many of you play with a pianist? So, my addendum there to tell the choir is tell the pianist. and to make sure, that either if you are doing an arrangement that, is written out, then of course you both want to have that. Or you just have the pianist play unison melody or drop out on that verse. And if it's a minor verse, like through many dangers, toils and snares and amazing grace, usually it can be fine if the pianist drops out. That gives a difference of texture on that verse. And if it's a minor key and you're holding a minor chord with your left hand, you could solo out the melody to give a little bit more leadership in the pianist's absence. Yeah, great questions, and thank you for mentioning that, because it is important to let your counterpart on the other side of the chancel know what you're doing.
But aren't you the director of music?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So,
yeah. And I also tell the choir, if for some reason I decide I want to do something different and you hear me playing unison melody at the beginning of verse, go ahead and sing unison melody. So there are times, if the moment strikes, if the spirit moves, I'll decide to do something like that. And I've not given them the heads up ahead of time, but they'll know, to go to the melody. Yes?
Our choir director is a lady, she does have a really great sense of humor.
Yeah.
And she does it all the hymns, but she said if I'm on the organ, or if the organ is playing, she said, they're following the organ. It doesn't matter if I stand there and stand on my head, they're going to follow.
They're going with you, yeah.
And I really do try to watch them.
Yeah, I joke with, when we were on this tour, you play in different churches, and sometimes the organ is here and the choir is singing out there, and you're looking through a mirror. There was one place where literally the mirror was located at the base of where those pipes are. So, and the choir was in the front of the room, and the conductor was standing in the center aisle. And really that mirror was only so that the organist could look up and see if the priest was at the table done, with the consecration of the elements or something like that. It wasn't for watching a conductor. So we got there and, we're looking at this situation, and the only way I could see where the conductor was is I leaned back. And so we ended up setting, there was a rickety old step ladder over in the corner. We set it up, and the organist brought out this broken mirror that was about this big, had a big slice out of it, and duct taped it to the ladder so that I could look up there and see the conductor who was back there. But the conductor asked me, he said, "Bradley, can you see me?" And I said, "It doesn't matter, I don't really watch." But of course I do. Of course I do. Any other questions? All right.
I asked at a workshop one time who determines the tempo of the hymn, and one of the people there replied, "My minister of music thinks he does."
And that was where our choir director says, the organ, no matter what I do.
Yeah. Well, and I think that underscores the importance of the organist having a really good sense, not only of rhythm, but also of how much breath it takes to get through a line. And someone said to me this morning, as I was leaving the worship service to come over here to prepare, he said, "Thank you for singing, because I love to see when the organist sings." And you get a much better sense of how to play anything if you sing it, because we as organists have to have everything lined up vertically. it's just part of what we do. And because of the way our music is laid out, because we're concentrating on multiple parts at once, and we want that ensemble to happen together, we think very vertically. And sometimes when we go to the piano, you hear us play very, very vertically. Instead of so the thing is always thinking about how can I take the line somewhere. And excuse me, it's easy to play vertically as an organist when you go to the piano. But what's wonderful is if you can take the linearness of a singer or a flutist or a violinist or a great pianist and bring that to the organ and figure out how to make that happen. Because that will make the congregation that much more at ease in the way that they sing. But it still has to have that rhythmic solidity. But you're right, we do run the world. All right, any other questions or comments? Thank you all so much for being here, for your attention.